So, this whole project-based learning thing, why bother? We thought that we might show you something, explain a real life situation where project-based learning was necessary.
Gene, we have a situation brewing with the carbon dioxide.
We had a CO2 filter problem on the lunar module.
5 filters on a limb.
Which were meant for 2 guys for a day and a half. So I told the doc.
You're already up to 8 on the gauges. Anything over 15 and you get impaired judgment, blackouts, the beginnings of brain asphyxia.
What about the scrubbers on the command module?
They take square cartridges.
The ones on the limb are round.
Tell me this isn't a government operation.
This just isn't a contingency we've remotely looked at.
Those CO2 levels are going to be getting toxic.
Well, I suggest you gentlemen invent a way to put a square peg in a round hole. Rapidly.
Okay, people, listen up. People upstairs handed us this one, and we gotta come through. We gotta find a way to make this fit into the hole for this, using nothing but that. Let's get it organized.
Okay, let's build a filter.
Better get some coffee going, too.
So, you can imagine that situation where all they have is a small group, a small set of materials in which to use. And they gave a group of men to say, fix it. Life or death situation. Well, maybe our projects aren't like that intense. I hope. But you can see where project-based learning is necessary. And it's the way the real world works. You ask some of these guys in this building, I have a feeling they're doing the same type of thing every day. They're given an idea and they're saying, hey, you guys work on it, you figure it out. Okay. Ed, you want to start us off today? Sure. All of our notes and everything else that we're doing today can be found at kaes.pbworks.com. kaes.pbworks.com. I'm going to ask one of the ladies with better handwriting than I am to actually write it up there. If you'll go down to the very bottom of that page, you'll see a PBL workshop link, and you can go there and pull up all of those PowerPoints and everything else that we're going to use today is there. There's also some extra resources that are great for homework because we are teachers. We had to give you homework. That means that you are free to go back and kind of research and do a little bit more in depth as you feel necessary.
And something else to add to what Jeff said, just kind of as we were going today, if you have a question or something comes to mind, I think you have some sticky notes on your table. If you want to jot those down during the breaks and things like that, you can come and just stick them up here. But just kind of as you're going, if you think of something, of course we want you to ask while we're presenting, but if you just happen to think of something, just kind of jot it down. That way you remember it and you can stick it up here.
Most of you sitting in here right now don't know any more about this than I knew 2 months ago when I started here at Nightdale. I was very much like Ms. McIntyre, the teacher at the very beginning of it, where I would come in and think to myself, plot down a packet of papers that will spell out an absolute project. Now I'm doing project-based learning. But as you saw going through it, that's obviously not the case. I want to kind of show you something here. This is one of the first things that I did when I got into Nightdale. We were doing edifice. So I wanted the kids to create a postcard and write a letter from one character to another to sort of summarize the end of the story. Let me know that they understood it. This is an example of it. As you can see, it looks beautiful. Okay? Looks like what a lot of us would think of as an effective project-based learning experience. But when you actually look at the way that I laid out the directions, very much the prototypical just project. Okay? It's literally spelled out step by step exactly what to do to create the project that you saw. In my head, that was project-based learning, but as I've worked with this incredible team here at Nightdale, I've begun to understand that project-based learning is about the actual process rather than the end result. Okay? There's a little table. Some good information. I don't know how easy it is for you guys to see. Projects end up sort of being the dessert. whereas project-based learning is the main course. Project-based learning to me is the actual process of learning within a project. It starts with an entry event, something that piques the student's interest, something that's interesting personally to students, something that is authentic to a real-life scenario, even if it's not necessarily implemented. Okay? But there's a lot more personal choice for the students. There's a lot more involvement in the actual learning process rather than what we're accustomed to, which is giving a project at the end of a unit when all the learning has already taken place. Okay? So if you look at this, when to do it, a normal project is done at the end of a unit. Project-based learning is during the unit. It's how the students learn. Teacher guiding. The teacher gets involved with the students and guides them in the right direction, but it's the students who are taking the actual steps to do the learning themselves. You need essential questions, you need driving questions, entry events, things that the other presenters are going to go through to create a project-based learning environment. But at the end of the day, it's the students taking more responsibility for their own learning. I also have an example of a good actual project.
If you're having trouble seeing the screen, obviously you can follow right along from the PB Works link. You'll go right in line with the handouts that is covered.
Okay. So this is a borrowed project-based learning setup. Okay. With an entry event about the local historical society needing some work done to exemplify the American dream. So you can see that this is an actual authentic goal that's in mind. And the way that it sets up, the teacher introduces it with that entry event and then gives them guided steps. But it's not a step-by-step informational piece of instruction on exactly how to construct the project itself. It's a process. So the teacher launches with the entry event and assigns the groups. They use commonplace books in this one. Everybody's familiar with commonplace books. Commonplace books back in history where families kind of put together these scrapbook-like things. Sometimes they would put together all their, say, home remedies for illnesses and things like that and carry it down through generations. It can be informational, it can be sentimental. But the point is, again, giving the students plenty of choice in what they want to do. Throughout the steps, the students are journaling in this particular example. This way, they can reflect back on what they've done. They can sit in seminars with the teacher, be able to go over what they've done, be able to go over their progress on creating the project. These groups are, like step 2, groups meet to develop a contract, assign tasks. Step 3, students begin to do research. Everything is guided by the teacher, but it's the student who's really driving. The teacher's not just giving you a set of instructions and giving you an end process in mind. Okay? But as it goes all the way through, eventually students will have an opportunity to present everything that they've learned. And a big key for project-based learning is you want to try to present it in a public forum if possible. Okay, it's not just, okay, my project's done and they hand it to the teacher. They present it to their peers. You can even present it to, in this particular case, members from the local historical society. Again, even if it's not implemented, it's something that addresses an authentic need. Okay, so that's a little bit about the differences between projects and project-based learning.
So we're pretty much actually going to talk about, let's kind of summarize projects versus project-based learning. So we're actually going to kind of talk about why PBL and just a little bit of the examples of what we've kind of worked on in our career academy. Then we're going to kind of launch into some of the individual components that Ed talked about for us. And so we're going to kind of talk about some of our individual projects, kind of highlighting what we talked about as main course versus dessert kind of thing.
Good morning. The first project that we wanted to share with you that we've been working on as a PACE Academy is a composting project. And we were actually lucky enough to secure a grant to start a composting initiative at our school. And this is a project that we've started, and it's an ongoing project, and we're hoping to complete it by the end of the year. But the problem that we posed to the students dealt with a problem that we're seeing in the cafeteria, students not putting things away, not throwing their trash away. We had a really messy cafeteria. And so the composting initiative we're hoping is going to help solve that problem, as well as kind of go along with our environmental theme. So what we did is we actually got all of the academy students together, and it was really fun for the teachers because after we posed the problem, we literally got to kind of sit back and let the students do the work. So it was a great day for us, and it was really awesome to see how engaged the students were in their small groups. So the students prepared presentations about how they were going to launch this composting initiative into our school. And they came up with some really awesome ideas, and I think we have a link to that on the PD Works page with some of their work examples. So I encourage you at some point throughout the day to just go on there and take a look at what they came up with during that time.
Something else that we worked on, Madeline talked about the composting, that involved all of our academy students, sophomores through seniors. Another project that we worked on, we submitted a proposal to the Emerging Issues Forum, which is a program through NC State University. That involved just our seniors. Our seniors take English, and they also take future decisions in science. So they have myself and Mr. Scammon together. And what we worked on was the project with the Emerging Issues Forum. They had to create either a product or an environment that increased student engagement. And so they worked on the project in their future decisions in science class, and they came up with a proposal. They presented that proposal to their career academy teachers, and then after that they worked on the proposal in my class in English. So it was kind of a twofold project. They worked on the actual project in one class, and then they worked on the proposal, which incorporated their English components in my class. And so they got the presentation piece, as I was talking about, and then they also got some writing components in there. And then we submitted those proposals to the Emerging Issues Forum. So that was kind of that cross-curricular piece that we got with that particular project. And we also have an example of that up on the website.
And I'm going to talk about a third project. Jeff mentioned, but I teach history. And so those projects that we did kind of academy-wide and cross-curricular are the ideal situation because they're authentic and they're solving real current problems. I teach history, and while we can solve problems in the past, it has to be theoretical. So when I design projects that I'm going to do inside my class, it is automatically a step more difficult. So if I have any other history teachers out there, just know that it can still be done, because I know my first reaction, this was years ago, is, but I teach something that already happened. And therefore, how are we going to change it? So I'm going to talk to you actually about a project that I'm doing in my class right now. Literally, my students are working on it while I'm not there. So that just tells you, first off, about you becoming the facilitator rather than the direct instructor, because they're going to get a lot of work done without me today. And that's because I've done prep and I've done setup, and they know what they're doing. We're near the end of the project. But I am currently at the end of our new course, which is called American History 1, and it goes through the Reconstruction period, if you're familiar. And so what they're doing right now for their PBL is they're preventing the Civil War. And when they do that, of course it has to be theoretical, because we know the Civil War happened. But they have this assignment that you have to convince an audience that you could have actually prevented it. Like if you could travel back in time and you could talk to those people, you could tell them what to do to keep it from happening. And this is where you really see that it's the main course and it's not the dessert, because this unit was supposed to be about causes of the Civil War. Well, if I tell them their job is to prevent it, they are going to learn the causes, because they're not going to be able to prevent it unless they know what caused it. And so it's through the project that they actually learn that information. I've done very, very little direct instruction, like mini short lesson every day, and based on the questions that they ask me. just based on what they figured out they needed to know. So you have a little more like kind of automatic buy-in when you do it that way. They're like, if we're going to do this project, we have to know what cost it was offered. And so you get them to do a little research and then you answer their questions. It's really the only type of direct instruction that's been done for this project. And they have really creative ideas that are their own ideas. Things like, I have one group saying, well, if we were never independent from Britain, there would have been a civil war. And Britain outlawed slavery before the United States, so that's another reason that that would have worked. We shouldn't have even fought the Revolutionary War. So now I have one group of kids that are preventing the Civil War, they're actually trying to prevent the Revolutionary War. And that's reviewing my entire course. And so project-based learning can be really powerful, even if it has to be theoretical. In an ideal situation, you're solving a real and current problem, but I teach history, so we have to do it theoretically, but they're still doing really awesome things in that project. We have other people working on, another group said, well, they should have had a debate instead of a war. And I said, well, take that a step farther, make rules for debates that we can use. Yours is going to be proposed to the UN now. What rules would you propose to the UN so that nobody fights wars, everybody has debates? What should be the rules of a debate if it's going to prevent a war? So it can really stretch in a lot of different directions, whereas I have some kids just say, well, somebody else should have won the election of 1860. So it also is differentiated kind of based on what the kids are interested in and a little bit on ability level, because they're each taking themselves in their own direction. Not only assignment was, convince me you know how to prevent the war. Okay, so that's just kind of an example that, like I said, that's happening real time. That's happening in my classroom today. Because they've been working on it. So now they've gotten their plans written. They're getting ready to present tomorrow.
I think another thing that we've noticed is that it provides that their questions are a lot more authentic, because you never, depending on what road they go down, you never know what they're going to ask, whether it's composting or the emerging issues or the causes of the Civil War, because they can spin in a million different directions, and it causes us to have to really think on our feet, and they get to see your thinking process, and then it makes that process even more real for them.
How many of you guys went through the Skills and Pay the Bills workshop that we did? Career Academy, right? Okay. Those soft skills that we kept harping on and those things, this incorporates those soft skills like you and I do. They have no other choice but to be able to stand up in front of a group and present. They have no other choice but to be able to research. They have no other choice but to be able to work in a group.
We have like 2 minutes. Do we want to pull up one posting? I think we have time, so we'll actually show you some of the examples now.
In their task, they had to, that she actually talked about, they had to come up with how they're going to implement it, how they're going to get the information out to the rest of the student body. They worked in small groups, and so we have just a couple of examples of their task.
On the PBL page.
This is why you have to work with people.
While he's pulling this up, I want you to think about these children of 5 years down the road. Where's the relevant piece there? Where's the relevant? Because I was in a classroom yesterday, I was in a Cruise 1 classroom, and a teacher was talking about ethics or whatever the rules for proper internet. And I started talking to the kids, and I said, well, what do you learn? They told me everything they learned. I said, why are you learning? Because we're going to have a test on it. And I said, well, why are you learning about proper editing? I just told you because we're going to have a test on it. I said, is there any reason that you really need to know? I'm playing devil's advocate the whole time, proper internet etiquette, outside of school or anything else. She said, well, no, I guess there's not. So in my opinion, that teacher missed a very important chance to get that entire objective of the lesson through and show them exactly how that's relevant to the child 5 years ago. So I guess that's what I want you to think about as you're going forward. What's that child going to remember about the concept they're teaching in 5 years from now? And we can't take everything and make them use it. That's what we should be working towards.
This is just one of the students' ideas, and like we were saying, these kids were organized into several groups, and what we did was we designated seniors to kind of initiate and lead these groups. they all came up with their own ideas. At the end of the day, they presented this to the rest of the Case Academy students. Some of the students did PowerPoint, some did Prezzies, and they all kind of had their own little spin or twist on them. Let's see.
That's the other thing. When you're doing PBL, there should be a way for students to put in their voice and their choice. So as Ed mentioned, it's never prescriptive. So it's never, your assignment is to make PowerPoint. Now, we told them they had to give a presentation, and they therefore identified that Prezi and PowerPoint are useful presentation tools. That's a lot different than us assigning them to make a PowerPoint with 10 slides and 3 bullets on each slide and all of that. It has to be authentic, and it has to be based on their choice. And they also just tend to resent it less when it's presented in that way. When they know that, oh, I think a PowerPoint is the best way to do this, then they are more likely to be engaged in actually the creation of that.
And one other thing, as I was saying earlier, we were fortunate enough to get a grant to help start this initiative in our school, and we are in the process of still kind of getting it started. We're actually beginning building our composting bin now. But one thing that we thought was really cool was how the students came up with ways, like rearranging the cafeteria. That doesn't cost any money. So there was ways to have a great impact and really be influential with their project design that didn't cost money. So I think that one of the fears of PBL is, well, where do I get the financial backing from? And some of the ideas the students came up with didn't cost me money. It was merely just logistical, moving things around.
And one of the things that helped us out as a school is we have a problem. I don't know if your kids pick up after themselves in the lunchroom every day. And as an administrator, I spend the majority of my day picking up trash. And I'm tired of picking up trash every day. So one thing that we're trying to do to work together is have them come up with a way to get everyone compost and put things in the right bin so that children pick up after themselves. So we're solving an actual problem that we have as an administrative team in the school, and the kids have buy-in. They have buy-in, they get behind it, and they spread it to their other 1,700 classmates that this is where we're going with this. Now, we're not there yet, but we're at a much better place than we were 6 months ago with our children cleaning up after themselves in the lunchroom.
Maybe you guys saw the little logo that one of the groups created, the K with the little apple rhyme, and I think that was just part of the buy-in, like Dr. Wilson was talking about. They were so pumped that they were like, this is going to go on all the bins, we're going to have t-shirts, this is going to be great. So they were so enthusiastic about just getting this project started, and that enthusiasm will hopefully infiltrate to the rest of the school.
What's interesting is the fact that these same kids that came with these ideas are now on us. I mean, it's like, okay, why haven't we got the t-shirts printed yet? You know, why haven't we done that? So they're really invested in this thing, and that enthusiasm just kind of spreads throughout the class.
All right, first of all, Joey mentioned earlier to use our inside voices. I grew up in an Irish-Italian household, so if you had an inside voice, you could, if I'm a little loud, I apologize first of all. I'm going to talk about how to develop an idea, okay? These are great ideas, they sound really cool, but how did we come up with them? So, first of all, we're teachers. We're teachers. We steal ideas. I'll be the first to admit there are days I get into school, I'm like, oh man, I've got class in an hour, I don't have a good activity. Google, you're my best friend. Well, sometimes we find our best friends. First of all, the Buck Institute, they're the group that made the book for you. If you go to their website, BIE.org, there's all sorts of stuff on there. Now, It's the way they made it, and you can tailor make it and adjust it to the way you want to use it, which is something that we can do all the time. Another I found a link that's an Edutopia link. Another great list of project-based learnings, good cross-curricular one. But the big one we want to focus on today is developing your own. How do we do that? Now, there's a whole bunch of different methods. Ms. Gay and I were talking about it last night. Well, some of them happen completely by accident. Like Dr. Walton talked about with the composting idea. Well, our plan wasn't, oh, let's come up with a composting idea. Dr. Walton and the administrative team came to us and was like, guys, this trash is really annoying. So it kind of just snowballed from there. Okay? Another thing, the emerging issues one that Ms. Gay talked about with the NCC. Found that online one day accidentally. She came running into my room and said, oh my gosh, Stanley, we got to do this. And I said, okay, let's go for it. And it just kind of snowballed from that. And other ones, like Ms. Alford talked about with the Civil War one, we kind of really developed from the ground up. All right, so the basic parts. This is kind of the skeleton framework of what we want to do with our project-based learning. First of all, a title. And one thing that I learned about, especially when I was in college at Appalachian State, greatest school in the world, that's right. All right, watch it. So not everyone can get an Appalachian. All right, so the title. So if you're developing a project, one thing that I've always learned is when you walk in and you say, okay, kids, we're going to learn about cells. Well, that sounds boring to me just saying it. So come up with a title that's really going to hook them. Okay? An open-ended question, which kind of gets to our developing or driving questions later on. Obviously, the grade. What content are you looking at? So our composting was all of the academy. But when we did the Civil War one, that was specific for the class. The next one is the project idea. What are the students actually going to be doing, and what are they going to be creating? What are they going to get out of this? Because I can have my kids make a model of the cell, but once they give it to me, it's left their mind. They don't care. So what are they going to actually get out of it? And then the driving question. I'm not going to beat too much onto that one. Ms. Gates is going to get into that one. But the driving question is, so Ms. Alford's one was, how could we have stopped the Civil War? Well, there's not one answer to that. There's a whole bunch of different ways that she talked about it earlier on. The content. What classes are this project linked to? We want to get as many different classes linked to this as possible because that's how it's really going to stick. If I do a project just for science, but a kid is really a social studies kid, well, if I can incorporate social studies into that project, they're much more likely to be invested in that project. And then the major products. What are they actually going to be making? What tangible thing are they going to get out of this? And finally, the public audience. How do we break down these four walls? I don't want my students to just leave my class being great students. I want them to be able to use the skills they learned in my class in the world. All right, so how do we make it fit? One word we like to use in the Case Academy, we don't like to say real life skills. We like to say it's authentic. We like to say it's authentic. Everyone's telling me right now. So why do we need to know this? Why is this project worth doing? One thing that I'm doing with my future decisions students right now is we're doing a project where we're talking about science education. So I could say, okay, write a lesson plan with all the points and turn it into me, and that would be great. But one thing that we decided to do is we're actually working with the OCS students, and we're going to develop a lab with them and work with them. So although we're not leaving the school, we're really still breaking down the four walls of my classroom. Yeah. OCS, Occupational Courses Studies, Special Ed. So that's yes. Yes. License.
Give me a thumbs up if you understand the term OCS.
Okay.
Are we good to move on, guys?
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Duncan. All right. Next thing is the thought-provoking questions. The term hot cues. Higher order thinking questions. We shouldn't be able to ask a question to our students, have it regurgitated right back to us, and it be over. We want something that's really going to linger, something that's going to make them create, develop ideas in their mind. And like I said, the public audience, breaking down the walls. All right, so what's a driving question? Like I said, Ms. Gay's really going to get into what the driving question is, but the big phrase we like to use in our academy is we don't want the answer to be Googleable. We don't want them to say, okay, let me jump on Google. How could we have stopped the Civil War? Enter, click the first link. And trust us, we have kids who will try. They will try. They will get on Google and they will go to the 16th O at the bottom and try to find the answer, but it's not going to be there for them. So that's a big thing. We want it to not be Googleable. And it's really, and obviously since it's a driving question, it's what's really going to push the project on. Ms. Alford talked about in her Civil War one, that question really led to other questions within the project. Okay? And like so, cross-curricular projects. We wanted to incorporate as many things as possible. So when you hear composting, you might think, okay, that's agriculture, that's Miss Batts, 4 of us, we can kick our feet up and we're done. But we don't want it to be that way. We want to incorporate as many classes as possible. So the science aspect, the impact of compost on the environment. Why is it a good thing? We've got landfills, that's wonderful. But how is that going to prevent it? So agriculture, obviously how would the composting be effective? The English, one of the things we talked about earlier was the advertising that we were doing. And a lot of these kids were using a lot of creative writing aspects in their advertising. Really great stuff is coming out of it. So creative writing. And the social studies, a lot of civics issues come up here. About civic duty and those kind of things. So what are we leaving behind? Well, not every project we're going to have a monument for when we're done. That's not going to happen. But we want one of 2 things. A lasting impact on the school, like with the composting thing. Our hope is that the kids who are at East Wake Middle right now, that will eventually be Knightdale Knights, will know about composting from their freshman year all the way up to their senior year. And the other big thing, the impact it has on the students, is the skills they've gained. What do they get out of it? Because like I said, I can have students turn in a project, create a pedigree of your family, turn it into me, okay, cool. I give it back to you, they get it, they drop it in the recycling bin. What does that do for them? Not much. So how can we get a public audience? Now, a lot of times when I say public audience, when we said it before, we think, okay, we need to outreach to the community. Well, that's awesome. We've worked with the mayor, we've worked with business owners. That's great, but it doesn't necessarily have to be outside of the school. Like we said, with the composting thing, we're reaching outside of the academy with the administrative team. Coach Brown, who's one of the people in our lunchroom during lunch to keep things under control, he was there. He wanted to make sure it works because that's kind of his domain. So we reached outside of the classroom and we reached more people. So that's really what the public audience is. And one thing, especially the kids love, is we live in an age where we can reach anyone in the world. We can reach anyone in the world. And the way we do that is through the internet, through YouTube, blogs, forums. These kind of things can really incorporate more of a public audience. If we can create something that's an idea and say, hey, world, what do you think? And get feedback and adjust, we've really done something really well. So what I want you to do now is I want you guys to work in a group. Okay, I'm going to give you about 15 minutes to work on this and really talk about what are some ideas we have. Now this is the brainstorming phase. So there's no bad ideas at this point. And the reason I say that is this is kind of going to be the skeleton for what we're going to do for the rest of the day. So the more ideas you have, you might say, well, this one's working real well, but when you get to the driving questions, maybe you can't get a really good driving question out of this. Okay? So I want you to set up your own project. If you turn to page 51 in your book, there's kind of a setup right here of how they do it. The project title, grade, project idea, driving question, content, major products, public audience. So that's really what you can kind of use as your base to help guide you through making this project. So again, think about the things that we've talked about here. What are we doing? Give a brief explanation of the project. Driving question, how do we get the student to think at a high level? How do we avoid just regurgitating answers? We don't want that. Content, how can we get as many classes involved as possible? Not everyone in your academy teaches the same thing. So hopefully you can get more things in there. And if you guys do tend to teach the same thing, reach out to other things in your content. For example, if you're a foods teacher, well, if you're doing foods, you need to know math. If you're doing foods, you need to know science, those kind of things. Like major products, what are they making? How is it going to last? And again, it might not be lasting in the school, but it might be a lasting skill on them. And finally, the public audience. How are you going to reach out? So like I said, take about 15 minutes, talk with your group, talk with your academy, see what kind of ideas you guys come up with. And all of us, we're going to be walking around. If you guys have questions, we'll be happy to answer.
Looking at these wrongly worded questions, you want to think about why are they wrong. Are they wrong because there's a lot of jargon in them? Are they wrong because they don't engage the students? Are they wrong because they're not open-ended? Are they wrong because they don't have the focus of the project in there? Okay, so you remember, those are kind of your criteria. This group in the back is a really, really wrong question. So we kind of needed to think about why that question didn't work. Some of you had the Googleable questions, okay? So what I kind of want to do is I want to go around to each table and just kind of quickly share how you redesigned your question. And then we're going to break out back out into your group so that you can have some time to design your own questions. So let's take a stab and see kind of how you redesign. We'll start over here.
Okay. We had the question, how can we use measurement skills and knowledge of geometry to plan a park? So this was definitely what we thought was a Googleable aspect question. So we changed it to, how could we as high school students effectively design a park? So that not only is applicable, we're directly connecting it to the students, they're creating something, but it's also open-ended. But the use of the word design indicates that they need to look at how it's created and what process we need to go through to actually design a park. And it's not closed off as in how are we going to measure the slide, the swing, but they can take it from any direction and include parking spaces and land, and it's really open-ended and it is all-encompassing, and they can create whatever product that they want to effectively show that their design has no holes and is complete.
And to add on, one thing that I like about that is, in the original question, it says, how can we use geometry skills? Well, the second question doesn't say, well, you guys developed doesn't say anything about geometry. So they can think about agricultural things, they can think about biological things, civics. So that incorporates a lot more different content areas.
One question we had, what trees grow in our community? So we changed it to, how do we as tour guides demonstrate what vegetation wildlife exists in our community?
We had three. The question was, what food should we eat to be healthy? We changed it to, how can we create a web page for other teenagers that recommends healthy foods to eat?
Nice. So again, that public audience.
Our original question was, is China a powerful country today because of its history, culture, and geography, or because of its political and economic systems? And originally we just changed it to what makes a country powerful, and we got some feedback from somebody, sorry, that to make it maybe a little more kid-friendly, to say if you were gonna be king of a country, what would you do to make your country powerful, to give them a little more leeway into thinking about their own.
Yeah. Back corner, did we figure out?
Okay. All right. Yeah, this is a crazy question. All right, here we go. All right, so it was, what are the similarities and differences in how similar themes and topics are explained in myths and stories from different cultures? And we flipped it into,
how does culture affect storytelling? So
One that had a lot of jargon in it, and so remember that when you have something you're trying to express your learning goals, it needs to engage students. Yes, they need to understand what the goal is, but at the same time, you need to engage your students. Okay, so the goal itself, your Common Core goal might be, a paragraph, but your question doesn't need to be a paragraph. Okay,
So our original question was, which buildings in our country should be classified as historical and protected from development because they represent important pieces of our past? And we changed it, we kind of zoomed in on Raleigh and instead, and we said, how can my team determine what historical buildings in Raleigh should be preserved or paved over? And we said that we wanted to start the unit by playing the Big Yellow Taxi song. Okay, your guys' song. Okay.
So there's a relevant piece.
Oh, back here. So we had, I actually teach English, and this one was, with English, so that worked out well. The question that we got is, how do people express emotion in poetry? And so, teaching poetry is a challenge with high school students, and so we kind of changed this question to, how can a poem with literary terms, Common Core, be used to solve an emotional issue in our lives? And so we thought that they could use poetry as kind of an outlet. They're going through an issue, maybe high school drama, write some kind of poem about it. So.
We have two. Our second one was, how is math used when calculating basketball statistics? And we tried to make it relevant, I guess, more to our school. How can Sanderson and basketball coaches utilize basketball statistics when choosing?
Okay. And you can push that even further into looking at things, broad scope, things, how things are calculated even further into the
Samuel? We had a question, how does an ecosystem stay balanced? We put, if the ecosystem is unbalanced, how can you justify balancing it for the future success for the society?
So ours was which stories and books are the most popular for people our age, and disclaimer, neither of us are English. But we changed it to what makes a storybook popular for teenagers, assuming it's teenagers. After they said theirs, I thought kind of like about putting them into the role of the author, but I don't know if they would all care about their book being popular, so that worked. If I'm the ruler of their own country, but we're kind of looking, I guess, at popular for people of different ages, so it is different between them.
We had what is a hero, and we came up with two different questions. We thought that we could change it to how can we create a historically accurate account of how the perception of a hero changed over time. Then they would have to go back and look at things like literature and songs, magazine articles, or how can we as journalists do that to such a direction?
Our original question was, what did the ancient Greeks contribute to the development of Western civilization? We reworded that to, how would modern Western civilization be different if the ancient Greek civilization never occurred? And so one of the things we thought with that question is you can really kind of zone in on a couple different content areas, like social studies with how would our government be different, drafting and architecture with how would architecture be different if it wasn't the Western system for the ancient Greeks, and kind of how would art be different, look at a couple different topics with that question.
Right, so we had a question, should there be more development in wilderness areas to the U.S.? Can you speak up? We can't hear you.
Should there be more development in wilderness areas in the U.S.? Which is more yes or no in one question, one answer can run. We were talking really that you need to know the purpose of the class is it environmental based or is it social studies based. Like, for example, social studies, you can take it to if there needs to be development in the wilderness area, why is our society working in developed areas where we can research back about how society was developed, what pieces need to go into society, and then why or why not is it working today? Why do we have to do
So you the collaboration piece there. Great job. Great job with what you're working on. What I would like for you to do in the couple minutes we have, and then we're going to take a short little break here in a minute, is now that you've kind of gotten the hang of looking at the different things, open-ended, engaging, not too much jargon in your question and how that kind of propels your project forward, take a look back at the project ideas that you worked on in Mr. Shanlon's piece and kind of start to look at developing some driving questions for those project ideas and kind of start to narrow down in on those. So take maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes to work on that as a team, and and try to start to develop some of these driving questions, okay? So go ahead and take some time in your tables to work on driving questions for the ideas that would relate to your academies, okay?
I did a little bit of it, and Wake County uses the Understanding by Design process, which is a book by McTighe. It's a good book if you're interested, but I'm just going to talk to you about how that relates specifically to PBL. And the first thing is you have to know which standards you want your project to address. Now, they can definitely be cross-curricular. We've been developing a new project for our sophomores that is addressing public speaking standards in English and in the CPE Ag courses. So you can definitely get standards from several different courses, or you can just develop an independent project that's only for your class that develops your standards. So remember I mentioned my project on preventing the Civil War that my students are working on right now. There are standards. They have to know the causes of the Civil War. In fact, that cause and effect is the main thing they have to know about the war. They don't even really have to know hardly anything about battles. Really, what the standards say that they need to know are causes and effects. So, I'm addressing a standards-based project, and they are actually learning my standard through the design of the project. And how do I know that they're learning my standard? I know that because I'm formatively assessing. So I'm going to walk you through today how you would formatively assess. So you start first with the standard that you'd like addressed. That can be a content standard, as we mentioned. That can be a Common Core standard. It can be a reading or writing skills standard. It can be one of your 21st century skills or habits of mind. Okay, in your books, if you'll actually look on page 28, you'll see a sample of what we're going to do, but it addresses what they call habits of mind. So things like persuasive writing, in addition to actual content driven design as well. Okay, so it can be a content standard or it can be a skills-based standard. You need to unpack your standards. If you're unfamiliar with that process, unpacking standards means that you look at the skill that the standard says that they should do. So if the standard says evaluate the causes of the Civil War, and not only teach them to list the causes of the Civil War, they will be unprepared for the test question because the test is being designed based on the higher order thinking skill of evaluation. So if it says evaluate, in order to truly teach the standard, they have to evaluate. And so that's why my project is designed to prevent it, because that is an evaluation. It's a higher order thinking skill. So make sure that your standard is at the same level by unpacking it. And usually that means find the Bloom's bird. And you all know Bloom's taxonomy. I almost put it up here, but I was like, I'm not going to insult their intelligence like that. They know Bloom's taxonomy. So find that bird. Sometimes it's analyzed. Sometimes it isn't actually that high of a bird. That's actually kind of an issue that I have with our standards. Some of our standards say identify. You know, like some of our standards aren't really that higher order thinking. So if it is lower, we understand Bloom's taxonomy. If it's a lower skill and they do a higher one, then they're going to also accomplish the lower one. So if your standard just says identify, you've got it easy, because if you make them analyze, they're going to be able to identify. So make sure that you know what your standard that you're addressing says. It could be content or 21st century skills. And then make sure you unpack the standard and make sure your project is at the proper level for what the standard says that they should be doing. And that's just a Bloom's taxonomy level. The next thing you want to do is you want to align the product with the outcome. So when they make a product, their product should correlate with what you wanted them to learn. So if the 21st century skill that you were working on is public speaking, then their product is something that's going to have to relate to to public speaking. If you're working on persuasive writing, the product has to relate to persuasive writing. Okay, so make sure that your product also aligns as well. You can definitely use multiple products. Just to use the same example for the sake of consistency, on my Civil War project, the students had to first do a written plan, then they had to do a visual, and tomorrow they will do a presentation. So I'm actually assessing them on 3 different products, and I'm assessing different skills with each product. I used a critical thinking rubric for their written plan. I used a content-focused rubric for their visual. Did it include the necessary content? And then I'm using the 21st century skills public speaking rubric for their presentation tomorrow. So I'm actually assessing the different things, okay, based on what I wanted them to get out of doing each part. We've already mentioned that when you launch with an entry event, that is also a good time to formatively assess. If you have something that's getting them engaged in the beginning, then you can kind of see what do they know about this topic originally. In the case of my projects, almost nothing. What did they know about pausing the Civil War before they started it in my class? Slavery. And that's it. Okay, so sometimes you need to assess where they are. If they already understood most of it, then obviously my project is going to have to tweak in order to really engage them. Because when people teach us things we already know, that's very boring. That's why I didn't put Bloom's taxonomy up here. Right? So same thing with your kids. Your entry event can start as a form of assessment that can just happen informally through conversation. You're going to want to list the skills and the knowledge that they will need in order to do their project. Some of those things you may determine that they already have. Luckily, we teach high school students. So generally, although their writing may not be at the standard that we expect that it should be, they do know how to write. Okay, so some skills you may say, these are the skills that they have that they're going to use, and these are the new skills. So they know how to write, but I'm going to teach them how to write persuasively, for example. And I kind of recommend that you make a storyboard for your project. So that's actually what we're going to get to next. Now, I had you look at page 28. Page 28 is a sample of a project plan that you're going to actually make today, and then some examples of sources of evidence, things that you could use, like a self-evaluation or a final product, or your observation. Okay? Don't ever lose sight of the fact that the teacher's observation, when he or she knows her students, is an effective formative assessment. Like, I think people tend to think formative assessment has to be a benchmark test, which a benchmark test is a formative assessment. But also, if I look at my kids and see whether they look like this or whether they look like this, I am formatively assessing my lesson, right? So, and you are, or if they just have like that look, okay? Like, I know they're not getting it. So you just have to be cognizant of that as formative assessment as well. Like, teacher observation is a formative assessment that helps you understand. Now, if you'll skip past, we're not taking notes, so skip page 29 and 30. And go to page 31. Okay, page 31 is what they call the project map. And the project assessment map correlates with what's on page 28. So page 28, you see kind of the whole project design. The Teaching and Learning Guide is the Buck Institute format for the whole project design. And then on page 31, you would see what was basically like the teacher's brainstorming of how they were going to formatively assess that lesson. And then if you flip to page 33 and 34, you see more about how you would incorporate the 21st century skills that I mentioned, voice and choice, specifically on number 33. So how are the students going to have a voice in this assignment? How are they going to have a choice in this assignment? those two things are magical engagement tricks for students. If they think that it's their idea, then they are so much more engaged just from the get-go. If they get to have a choice in what they're doing, if they get to have a voice in what their project looks like. And then, as I said, page 34 is a list of 21st century competencies, if you need it as a reference. I imagine that's a lot more familiar to us, kind of along the lines of Bloom's taxonomy. Most of us probably know it. But if you want it, it's on page 34. So, what I'm going to take a few minutes for you to do, let's say 5 minutes. We're going to take 5 minutes, and I would like you to make kind of a project assessment map, like you see on page 31. There's a blank one on page 32, and yeah, there's 2 blank ones on page 32. And so if you want to write on your book, you can write it on these, or you can write it on a separate sheet of paper if you're trying to leave your book clean. But for your project, you've got your idea, you've got your driving question that you work with Nick and Anna. I want you to take it now. The first thing you say is, what is your final product? What is your summative assessment? Okay, now that may be specific. You may know that you want your students to make this certain thing. Okay, or like in my case, I just knew the final assessment was going to be a presentation of their plan. So it's going to look a little different, okay, depending on how you're designing your project. Okay, then what content or 21st century competencies are you going to measure based on this project? So for me, with my project, it was present the Civil War plan as the final product. I was going to measure their critical thinking, their understanding of the causes of the Civil War, and their presentation skills. Those would be the 3 things that would go next. And then, what can you do during the lesson to make sure that they are getting those things as they go? Okay, so what things you're going to need to do, and formative assessment goes hand in hand with scaffolding. If you're providing a scaffold for students, then you can formatively assess how they do at that step. Okay, and this is also what we mean by backwards design. So we start with our final product, and what skills does that address, and what content does that address, and then we go into, okay, how are we going to do each of those things? And you may not need a 3 for 3. Your project might focus on 2 skills, or you might only need 1 thing to support that. Okay, so don't feel like all these blanks have to be full, but take about 5 minutes and try to make a first draft of what this project map would look like if you are backwards designing the one that you've already mentioned today. Okay, 5 minutes, and we'll come around. If you're not finished with this yet, you can finish this up while we start the next step, but I think some people are ready to move to the next step, so I'm going to go ahead and intro that. You just try to find that happy balance. Jeff's going to talk to you this afternoon about managing PBL, but one of the number 1 things that I'll just mention right now, because it's coming up right now, is flexibility. This section's going to go longer because what you need, and it'll be the same way when you're working with your students. Some parts will take longer than you thought that they would take because it's what the students need, and then sometimes they'll surprise you and they'll do other things faster than you thought that they would do. So that flexibility is just something that's to be expected. What I would like to show you next is 1 step beyond the project assessment map. On page 93, you have a blank version of what they call the Project Teaching and Learning Guide. And this is basically the PBL lesson plan. It looks different than tradition lesson plan, okay? And it couples with the project overview, which is on page 92, to kind of serve as what you would use for your notes, for your plan of your project. And just, I know we're flipping around a lot of pages, I wish they had put these things together, but if you look on page 28, is an example of the blank page 93. So maybe if you, in your different groups, you want to have 1 person on 28 and 1 person on 93. Okay, that's your example. Now, interestingly, another page, if another group member wants to turn Okay, so it's kind of like draft 1 and draft 2 of your project. Now, we're going to actually have a chance for each group to get feedback from other groups. So the next thing that I would like you to do is start working on the assessment map or the project overview, whichever place you are. Start where you are, and I'm going to ask these guys for help. Give everybody one of these. So everyone's going to get a piece of Post-it poster paper, and what I'd like for you to do is put your basic idea on paper, and this, like I said, the purpose of this is for you to get feedback and ideas from other groups in a little while. You should include your topic and your driving question, and then this information, but it doesn't have to be this format. Okay? So don't feel like you have to redraw this on your paper, but you want to just include what skills and content are being assessed and how. Okay? So how to make your draft 2 and the project overview would be helpful for that as well if you would like to do it that way. Okay? But so you can share this at 11:30, which we're going to do one more thing before that, but so that you can share, okay, your topic, your driving question, and then the skills and assessments. Like I said, it does not have to be this format, but just if you just want to list skills and assessments, that's fine. And like I said, this is for you to get feedback. So we'll come around, continue helping you. Okay, but about 5 minutes, just put on this poster paper what you've gotten done so far.
Sarah,
Sure.
Liz, you're involving all of us.
Things which is rubrics, because I think the topic of rubrics will be helpful for you as you move forward with this. You will have more time on this, so if you're not finished, that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Madeline Batts because I think the information that she has for you on rubrics will be helpful in the next step.
All right, so now you've made it to the end of your first PBL, and it's time to do your summative assessment. Typically, the summative assessment at the end of the unit is super easy to grade. Give them a test for us CTE teachers. We can do it on elements. All the statistical data is given to us right then and there. But anyways, each test question is worth a certain number of points. Simple to grade. Sometimes the greatest PBL projects can be more difficult to grade because you're actually be on a separate rubric or by adding to your skills-based rubric. One of the rubrics that we've used within our academy, the Case Academy, is actually on page 87 of your workbook. And this is a presentation. And in this presentation rubric, you'll see that we're assessing skills like eye contact, voice, response to audience questions, things like that, very skills-based. suggestion, and this doesn't work every time, is to actually have your students help you create this rubric. Again, if they have that buy-in, they're going to be more engaged along the way. So the quality of writing, it should be, challenging to the student, but at the same time, it should be user-friendly. They should have a clear idea of the expectations that are outlined. Also, the use of the rubric to communicate expectations and guide students. Again, that's just being clear and concise. So the rubric, in the end of the day, for you as a teacher, it should serve as a guideline. So when you are grading those final projects or listening to those final presentations, you know exactly what you're looking for, and your students know exactly what to give you. They know what you want, and that can be that should be clearly defined in the rubric. So what I'd like for you guys to do is, with the project that you created, I'd like to give you guys until 11:30 to finish up your posters and also design a summative assessment for your project. So what you can do for that is you can either utilize some of the rubrics that are in your workbook, you can utilize parts of the rubrics that are in your workbook, or you can use the rubric for rubric to create your own. And we'll be coming around to help you.
You guys come up with a question, right?